6 months before this story ends, she is standing in her kitchen, holding a card. 31 years at the same job. A cake in the break room. A card everyone signed, including someone who is about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. Neither of them knows that yet. Think about your own kitchen table for a second. The people who've sat at it. The ones you'd trust with a spare key, a hospital decision, your last name on a form. Now imagine one of them is the reason you lose everything. That's not a stranger's story. That's the story almost nobody sees coming, because it never starts with a stranger. It starts with somebody already standing inside the party. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how trust gets turned into a weapon. Not fraud. Trust. The fraud is just what trust looks like after it's been used against you. Call her Diane. 63. Retired after 31 years grading papers and running parent-teacher conferences. Most people would have quit by year 10. A widow. 6 years now. Careful. The kind of woman who reads every line of a mortgage before she signs it. $410,000. Her whole working life, sitting in an account. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't lonely. She wasn't anyone's idea of an easy mark. That's exactly the point. Now meet Gary. And here's the thing about Gary. If this were a different kind of story, he'd be the good news, not the twist. 11 years ago, Diane's car wouldn't start in the church parking lot in February. Gary was the one who noticed, the one who drove her to work, the one who came back at lunch to jump the battery so she wouldn't have to ask twice. Small thing. Nobody remembers small things. Except Diane did. 3 years later, her husband got sick. Really sick. The kind of sick where casseroles show up on your porch for a while and then, eventually, they don't. Except Gary's wife kept bringing soup. Every week. For 11 months. Long after everyone else's kindness had quietly run out. Nobody asked her to. She just kept showing up. The week her husband died, Gary carried a couch up 2 flights of stairs so Diane's sister could stay with her, and when Diane tried to pay him for gas, he wouldn't take it. Got almost offended she'd offered. It wasn't only the hard years, either. Good ones counted too. Diane turned 60 the spring before her husband passed, and Gary was the one who organized the surprise. Badly, obviously, everyone in the church hall could tell something was up except her. He gave a toast that made her laugh so hard she had to sit down. Small, ordinary, forgettable, the kind of afternoon nobody photographs because nobody thinks to. She still thought about it, years later, more than she thought about almost anything else from that whole decade. You don't build a decade like that on purpose. It just accumulates. One Sunday coffee at a time, one ride to the mechanic at a time, until one day you look up and realize this person has quietly become part of the architecture of your life. Ask yourself honestly, is there a Gary in your life right now? Someone who's shown up enough times that you stopped keeping score? Good. Hold on to that feeling. Because that feeling is exactly what gets used against people like Diane, and it's not a flaw in her. It's not a flaw in you either. It's the same trust that makes a life worth living, and for a moment, in this story, it becomes a liability instead. There's a name for what happens next, but don't reach for it yet. First, the moment itself. It was after a Sunday service. Coffee urn, folding chairs, the same conversation they'd had 100 times before. Gary mentioned a fund. Real estate, short-term lending, steady returns, nothing flashy. He almost seemed embarrassed bringing it up. Said it wasn't usually open to new people. Said he only mentioned it because he'd been thinking about her, about whether her money would actually last. Sit with that phrase for a second. He'd been thinking about her. That's not a sales pitch. That's 11 years, cashed in, without either of them fully realizing it. Researchers have a name for this pattern: affinity fraud. It spreads through the places people already trust by default. Churches, veterans groups, retiree clubs, tight-knit communities where you'd never think to ask a stranger's question, because nobody in the room feels like a stranger. The scheme doesn't have to convince you of anything. The community already did that work years ago. For free. Picture yourself at that coffee urn. You've known this person a decade. He's never once lied to you. What question would you actually ask him in that exact moment? Most people wouldn't ask any question at all. That's not naivety. That's just how trust is supposed to work with almost everyone else in your life. Diane asked a few anyway, because that's who she was. Gary answered everyone without flinching, showed her his own account, real numbers, a real growth line. She went home and looked the fund up herself. Real website. Real office 2 towns over, the kind with a directory in the lobby. Nothing waved a red flag. Because the entire thing had been built, patiently, so that nothing would. She started with $20,000. A test. The exact amount she'd already decided she could survive losing. 90 days later, a check arrived. On time. To the dollar. Here's the part that should unsettle you more than anything so far. That check was real. It's called seeding, and it might be the oldest trick in the entire history of financial fraud. Pay the early investors, on time, in full, and the fraud never has to argue its case again. From that point on, the victim's own bank statement becomes the salesman. Not a promise anymore. A receipt. Imagine holding that receipt in your own hand. Imagine what it would take, at that exact moment, to still say no to the next ask. She said yes. Then yes again. Gary mentioned, almost in passing, that 2 other families from the church had joined that same year. People Diane had known even longer than she'd known him. She didn't ask their names. She didn't need to. Hearing the fund mentioned at potluck the way you'd mention a shared vacation did more to settle her than any conversation with Gary ever could. That's social proof, and it's the quiet third leg of the trap. It doesn't even need the salesman anymore. It just needs everyone around you, independently, seeming to agree. $400,000, eventually. Almost everything. Moved into an account controlled by a man from her church, and a name on a website she had personally, responsibly, looked up herself. Now picture Thanksgiving. Her daughter, Sarah, 34, drove 3 hours that morning rehearsing this exact conversation the entire way, because she'd been dreading it since October, ever since her mother mentioned to the fund on a phone call the way other people mention a new hobby. She waited until the dishes were half cleared. Mom, who actually manages this fund? Is it registered anywhere? Can I see real paperwork, not just a printout? Reasonable questions. Careful ones. Diane felt something close to her chest before she felt anything else. Not fear. Something closer to insult. This was her money. Her decision. Her friend of 11 years, being quietly cross-examined by a daughter who'd met him twice, for a combined total of maybe 40 minutes. You don't know him like I do, Diane said. I know that's exactly what they count on, Sarah said back, and immediately wished she hadn't, because it landed like an accusation instead of a warning, which is not at all how she'd meant it in the car 3 hours earlier. Diane's voice went quiet in a way Sarah recognized from childhood, the tone right before a door closes. So because I'm 63, I can't tell a good man from a bad one anymore. Is that it? That's not what I said. It's what you meant. It wasn't, not exactly, and Sarah knew it wasn't, but she also knew that explaining that right now would only dig the hole deeper, so she said nothing, and the silence did the digging for her instead. Here's what almost nobody says out loud about this exact argument: they were both right. Diane's trust in Gary was earned, real, built over 11 documented years of actual kindness, a surprise party, a jump-started car, 11 months of soup nobody had to bring. Sarah's fear was earned too, built over exactly 0 years of knowing him and everything she'd read online about exactly this kind of scheme. Two people, looking at the same 11 years from two completely different distances, and both of them absolutely certain they were the one seeing it clearly. If you were at that table, which daughter's voice would you have believed? Now ask yourself the harder question. If you were Diane, 63 years old, being asked by your own child whether you could still be trusted with your own money, whose voice would you have believed? The subject changed before dessert. Sarah let it go, told herself she'd bring it up again some calmer weekend, drove 3 hours home replaying every wrong word she'd chosen. That weekend never came in time. 6 weeks later, a payment didn't arrive. Gary apologized. Blamed the bank. Promised it was coming. It didn't come the next month either. His calls got shorter. Then they stopped. The website went quiet, then vanished. The office 2 towns over turned out to be a rented mailbox, abandoned the exact week the check stopped. No dramatic reveal. No chase. No confrontation in a parking lot. Just silence, arriving slowly enough that for weeks, she kept finding reasons it might still be fine. She was not alone in that silence, and that should make you angry on her behalf, not just sad for her. In 2025, Americans over 60 reported more than $7 billion in losses to fraud like this, a number that jumped nearly 60% in a single year. Investment schemes exactly like the one that reached Diane through a decade of church coffee were the single largest category of all of it. But the number that matters most isn't in any report. It's this: nothing that got bypassed in Diane was her intelligence. She understood interest rates. She'd balanced a checkbook for 40 years. What got bypassed was the part of her brain built to sound an alarm the moment real money is on the line, and it stayed quiet, because the person asking had spent a decade proving, patiently, that he wasn't a threat. That's not a story about fraud. That's a story about what trust actually costs when somebody decides to spend it all at once. Think about what she did right, because it matters. She didn't wire money to a stranger overseas. She didn't answer some typo-filled email about a lottery. She tested the relationship with real money before risking more, exactly the advice any financial columnist on earth would have given her. Every instinct she'd ever trusted had protected her from every scam she'd ever been warned about. It simply never occurred to her the warning needed updating. That the next version of this crime wouldn't call from outside the room. It would already be sitting in it. She went back to church the next Sunday, because where else does a person go? Gary's seat, 3rd row, aisle side, was empty. It stayed empty the Sunday after that, and the one after that. Nobody said his name out loud anymore. People who used to ask about him at potluck started asking about the weather instead, the careful way people avoid a wound that hasn't finished healing. Someone quietly moved his coffee mug, the chipped blue one he always used, out of the cabinet in the church kitchen sometime in December. Nobody mentioned that either. The coffee urn is still in the same corner. Nobody stands beside it quite as long as they used to. An empty chair, in a room full of people too polite to explain why. That's what betrayal actually looks like from the outside. Not a headline. A missing Sunday, repeated, until it stops being missing and just becomes how things are now. So what does it actually mean to protect the trust instead of abandoning it? It starts with one rule that has nothing to do with how long you've known someone. Verify the license, not the relationship. Every legitimate investment professional in this country is registered, publicly, searchable free in minutes through FINRA's broker check. Not a printout. Not a friendly website. A government record a fraudster cannot fake. If the name isn't there, nothing else in the story matters. Not the soup. Not the couch. Nothing. It continues with a harder rule. Any opportunity that resists a second opinion is disqualifying itself in real time. A real one survives a conversation with someone who has no stake in your yes. A fraudulent one needs secrecy to breathe, and calls that secrecy trust, when it's actually the scheme protecting itself. Picture yourself hearing "Don't mention this to anyone yet" from someone you love. What would that sentence actually mean, said out loud, stripped of who said it? One more piece of research, because it's the only one that might have changed everything. People who've simply heard about a scam like this before it ever reaches them are 80% less likely to fall for it, and 40% less likely to lose money even if they do. Not caution after the fact. Awareness planted long before the moment ever arrives. You just planted it. If there's a Diane in your life, the hard part was never the statistics. It's the conversation. Make it a standing habit long before any specific offer is on the table, so it never has to feel like an accusation aimed at one afternoon, one relationship, one person you love. And if it's already happened, report it, the same day if you can, to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, to your state securities regulator, to Adult Protective Services if the victim is older. Recovery is never guaranteed. Reporting still matters anyway, because it sometimes freezes what's left before it disappears, and because your report might be the one that finally connects one Gary in one small town to 100 towns just like it. Diane got a small fraction back, 18 months later. Not most of it. Never most of it. What she actually got back was smaller and stranger than money. The ability to finally say the true sentence instead of the false one. Not "I was foolish." A person spent 11 real years building something real, specifically so he could spend it all at once. Here's the part of Diane's story most people never think to ask about: she still trusts people. That's the piece that should genuinely surprise you. She didn't turn into someone who double locks every door and assumes the worst of every kind gesture. She still brings soup when someone's husband gets sick. She still sits at that same table most Sundays, third row, one seat over from the one that stayed empty for a year now. What changed isn't the size of her trust. It's the shape of it. She asks one question now, quietly, every single time real money and real relationships start to overlap, a question she never used to think to ask, not "Do I trust this person?" but "Has anyone who has no reason to lie to me looked at this too?" She asks it of her daughter. She asks it of her banker. She asked it, 6 months ago, of a financial advisor who turned out to be exactly who he said he was, and she invested anyway, calmly, awake to the difference for the first time in her life between trusting a person and verifying a claim. Trust didn't fail Diane. A system waited 11 patient years for the one moment trust would stop asking questions, and it bet correctly, right up until the moment it didn't matter to anyone but her anymore. Somewhere tonight, at another coffee urn, in another parking lot, somebody is being handed the exact same 11 years, wrapped in the exact same kindness, ticking down toward a Tuesday afternoon nobody has scheduled yet. They don't know it started. You do, now. And here's the last thing worth carrying out of Diane's kitchen, out of that empty third-row seat, out of everything you just watched. The villain in this story was never trust itself. It was a man who understood trust perfectly, and loved it just enough to spend it. Diane still leaves the coffee urn full for whoever comes after her, every single Sunday. That was never information. That was the only kind of trust that actually keeps you safe.